Let's start by talking a little bit about what I call the future of audit. And the future of audit is really, I believe, at the crossroads for all of us. The crossroads for all of us in our profession today. And I kind of have to take in a little bit of a history lesson in many respects to kind of think about what the past was all about, what's happening in today's world, and then kind of look forward into what the future might look like for us in our profession. And you could probably call audits of the past, if you will, something of the abacus stage, if you will. I think back in my early days of my career when I started at McGladrey, it was kind of more like what I call the arts and crafts period of public accounting. Back in the day when we wrote audit programs and actually thought about what it is we needed to do to carry out our audit procedures. We actually wrote those audit programs, and then the firm got a copy machine. And so then what we did is copied those audit programs because we certainly were going to do same as last year, every year. And so what we did is the arts and crafts period. We take a copy, we cut out the sign-offs, paste on a new, tape on a new page, draw the lines, heaven forbid we not have lines for the sign-offs, and then we take a copy again, and by gosh, that was how audits were put together in the past. And so that actually served as the springboard to the standardized audit program. And that's really what happened as time evolved, is, well, if we're going to do the same thing every year, and standards were starting to grow, why don't we create a standardized audit program? We also know back in the day, time was not much of an object. I actually can't remember an engagement letter for the first 5+ years of my career that said anything other than our fees are going to be based on time spent. Now, there's a pro and a con to that whole concept, because if I can make a camp out at a client for like 25 weeks, I don't have to worry about any other clients. And so the concept was the unlimited time and billing process also didn't really promote a tremendous amount of efficiency, a tremendous amount of thinking in what we're trying to do. That, coupled with the arts and craft phase of copying those audit programs and putting in sign-off lines, kind of was what we called audits of the past. Although I will tell you, we spent more time talking to our clients then. I will tell you that we spent more time talking to our clients because we actually grew up in a culture of talking to our clients. As Dr. Graham said, when we were taking that drive for 3 hours to a family thing, we actually talked to our brothers and sisters. Today's world, communication and talking by staff is not normally their number one choice of communication unless they can IM them, text them, or whatever. But audits of the past really did set the stage for the evolution to audits of the current state that we're in. Because throughout that whole process, that change that Dr. Graham talked about was prevalent. Things were constantly happening in this process. You went from the ledger sheets to the Burrow system, to RPG, programming, all these types of things. I forgot about COBOL and all those other things that happened in all those computer programs. And so then all of a sudden the auditor says, I got to get technology. Because everybody says I need technology. So we basically started throwing some computers at it. We basically said, hey, I can put this on a Word document, and I can make my audit program even more legible than the handwritten copy. And so now I've jettisoned the copy machine. I've now used a computer to print a standardized program, and I've thrown technology at it. And then at the same time, the fixed fee in the marketplace also has started to evolve. Fixed fee became much more prevalent and continued to grow throughout the entirety of these last year, and we're still still in a fixed fee environment in which we are today. And so what we figured out was, as well, in the current state, let's just figure out a way to fill out those forms faster. And so what we're doing in today's world of the audit is we're teaching our staff to frankly fill out forms fast, as opposed to thinking about the audit. And I can do a whole segue on the use of technology in the audit and how technology evolved. Think for a moment. How many of you in this room use a paperless technology system, whether it be engagement, knowledge coach, caseware? How many of you are paperless, if you will? A large percentage of this room. How many of you, if you actually printed out that electronic file, would say that that electronic file is almost a 100% replica of what that paper file looked like 25 years ago? And so what most firms did in the current world was they threw technology at the issue without really rethinking maybe something needed to change other than just create an electronic trash can and repository to store all this stuff. And so our current state is really at a very important challenge and crossroads in which we operate today, in my viewpoint. Is I ask this question all the time, and many of you have heard it before, but I always like to restate this because we've created such an environment of filling out forms and filling out checklists, and if I fill out enough checklists, I certainly must have done an audit. Well, the problem with that is your staff really don't know who they audited. I ask staff people all across the country a series of questions. It used to be one, then it was two, now it's three. Number one, I asked them what was the bottom line on their last audit. First time I asked them that question, that was the standalone question, I asked 250 people that question over the course of a few years. When asking that question, those staff people didn't know the answer. Take that back. One person did know the answer. They knew the answer. So 1 out of 250 people knew the answer of what the bottom line on their last audit was. And of course, at the end of the session, the individual came up to me and said, "Al, I have to be honest with you. They told me you always ask that question." So I went and looked. And so it's like, wait a minute. You that are senior managers, partners in this room, are relying on the work of your auditors to do the work that they're supposed to be doing, and they don't know one key metric on that audit. So then I started asking a second question in the last couple of years. Not only do I ask what was the bottom line on the last audit, I asked them how many pages is their disclosure checklist. And you'll be happy to note those 80 plus people that I've talked to still don't know what the bottom line is. But over half of them knew the number of pages of their disclosure checklist. And now, the third question I've asked is, how does the client make money? And the 60 people that I've asked that question, one of the responses I got was, "That wasn't my audit section. I don't have to know." And I go, what? How can you possibly take on an audit client and do work in an audit client and not know what their organization, their business, or their goals are? And I think about it, and I will tell you, I don't believe it's the staff's fault. I believe the leadership of that audit dropped the ball with really getting their staff to better understand what an audit's all about, what a client's all about, and really what we are as a firm in delivering this audit service. I think that the current state of the audit is in jeopardy. And I actually think our profession has had a big stake in putting it in jeopardy. Because I think that we have driven down the value. We've driven down it to a series of checklists. And we've driven it down to a concept of our staff not really getting the mentoring and coaching that they need to know on to really help them understand this process. I think it's kind of interesting. In audits of the past, I used to hear partners all the time when I was a senior accountant said, the auditors, these young auditors today, they just don't work like we used to. And so then you sit there today, and guess what those partners say today? Those young auditors, they just don't work like we used to. And so we got all these issues, and we haven't chosen to move forward and take them on. Because the bottom line is, everybody works hard. What's happened is, because of the dependence on lots of these checklists and believing technology is making a huge difference in our audit process, we've sort of forgotten the importance of talking to our staff. We've forgotten the importance of communicating what we really want to focus on in this audit process. I go around firms all across the country over the years, and I ask them, do you honestly feel that you've achieved a substantial return on your investment of technology in the audit? And they go, well, we're now at 3 monitors in the field. No, I said, that's not my question. I know you're using technology, but have you really received a return and gotten a return on your investment? And so I'm a huge believer in the embracing of technology, but I think we need to be different in the use of it. If your audit files on an electronic basis match what you used to do in a paper world, what you did is just replace paper with digital media. And what we need to think about in the audits of the future, that technology and the continued growth of technology and data and cloud infrastructures and things of that nature are going to continue to drive a wedge in the way we do work. I mean, I actually do believe that many years ago, I was working at a client, and I thought it was pretty innovative. The banker that was providing the funding for this line of credit for this commercial enterprise, they were basically a birdseed broker. It was a $1 million plus business, but what they were doing is matching up a company that grew birdseed and sold it to a company that sold birdseed. And they were just the broker, so they were basically dealing with the paper changes. And the bank that was financing them actually connected their system to the client's general ledger system. And so they could constantly monitor what was happening in their general ledger, because they are really trying to track the difference between payables and receivables, because each transaction was quite large. And each one of those transactions, without question, impacted the line of credit use. And I thought, well, and this was 15 years ago. And what I ultimately thought was, well, gosh, if they can monitor those general ledger systems, if they just had some metrics to kick out when there was an aberration or a deviation, why would the banker need the audit? Because the banker could basically do audits on this process. So then roll the clock forward from when I went to the AICPA, I had the benefit of being a member of the advisory board at Rutgers University for the Continuous Assurance and Reporting Lab. And those of you that have been involved in the AICPA might have heard of the name Niccolo Stassarelli, but he's always way out there on the edge on thinking, which is good because he's challenging all of us. But that Continuous Assurance Lab is actually doing things, and it's young PhD students that are really looking at all of this, quote, big data that's out there, and looking at mathematical algorithms and tools and processes to really help kick out deviations and exceptions, so that when they're doing real-time monitoring, then they can deal with those real-time monitoring issues if they come into play. Now you're going to say, well, wait a minute. Sure, that's big company, that's big corporation. That's not going to happen in Kansas. I disagree. I actually do believe that these monitoring systems will continue to evolve, and the importance of us understanding and utilizing technology is ever growing. I always thought it was really interesting. Most of you probably have heard well, I can audit around the computer. Can you really? Can you audit around the computer today? I actually don't believe you could really have audited around the computer 10 years ago. But we have a tendency to lull ourselves into sleep by saying, okay, I can just audit around this computer because Lord knows those numbers on that report came from a computer, so that's got to be right, which is certainly not the case. So when I think of the future state of the audit and the future state of what we're trying to accomplish, there's two directions this can go. One direction could be basically total elimination of the audit as we know it today through technology. I actually think the likelihood of that is fairly low, at least in the next 10, 15 years, so I'm good to go. I don't have to worry about it after 15 years, I'd hope. But the long and the short of it, though, the young ones in this room, you've got a huge future ahead of you, and we can drive the change positively for our profession. We really can. It's just up to us, because here's what I see happening is, as Dr. Graham said, one thing that drives change is the regulator. The slowest group to change from the audit as we know it today will likely be the regulator. So we've got a window of time right now to really get it right, to get our arms around this. Because the other crossroads is if we continue to perpetuate a further commoditization and continued commoditization of their audit, I don't know how low the fees can go. And think about this for a minute. We take on more risk than you can possibly imagine. We can get sued in a heartbeat when something goes wrong. They always want to know who's got the deep pocket. And we're willing to do our work consistently for less. And we all have the same rules. Why is that? I actually went into public accounting because I thought it was the best place to learn about business, and I actually thought the best business people I could possibly think of were CPAs in public practice. I have to temper that comment today, because I actually don't think that what I've seen is that we are generally the best business people, because we make irrational decisions on things such as what the value of the audit is. And as again, we know that it's evolved over time. The change won't happen overnight. But I would encourage us to really think about driving that change, because we can influence it quite dramatically. But we got to say enough is enough, and we got to basically make this future state more embracing of technology, not use of additional screens, but use technology to help us do our audit. Design our audit files that leverages the use of technology, not just as a repository of a whole bunch of paper representations of what we used to do in the past. And that's really our challenge for all of us to move this future state forward positively for us. There's plenty of people. I remember when I was at the AICPA, Bob Elliott was just the vice chair of the AICPA. He was a senior partner at KPMG, and he would do what I called shock therapy. He'd go to every session and say, the audit's dead. We're totally irrelevant. We're a waste of time. We need to move forward. And most people resented that statement. It was actually quite funny. The chair of the Auditing Standards Board was also a senior partner at KPMG, and he couldn't stand Bob Elliott because he was an audit standard setter, and he truly believed that the audit wasn't dead. But what Bob Elliott's strategy was what I call shock therapy, to get you to think differently. He was the one that actually started the concept of assurance services. One of the first assurance services that we developed while I was at the AICPA was this infamous program called Web Trust. And everybody said, Nobody's going to do any commerce on the internet. You're nuts. Why are you wasting this time at the AICPA for something like WebTrust when there is not going to be any commerce ever conducted on the internet? Do you think maybe that was not a correct statement? Think about how much commerce is conducted on the internet today. And that was not that long ago when those comments were made. So our future is ours to have. Or our future is to let it happen to us. It's just a matter if we choose to take charge of it. If we decide that we're going to take ownership of our process. But if we're going to do it, it's going to take some leadership. Now, think about this for a minute. Who in most firms is anointed quite often the, quote, head of A&A? Quite often, as I go around the country, it's the person that just loves to read financial statements and write review comments. It's generally the person that you wouldn't necessarily take out to talk to a client. And it's necessarily, quite often, it's a person that really wasn't good in the field, but was good and was happy to enforce the rules. Now, I will not underestimate the importance of quality in the audit without question. But if that's the leadership of the way the audit practice moves, the mindset is going to be one of rules and what I call the forms police. Did you fill out all the forms? Did you fill out all the checklists? Oops, you answered that question wrong. We need more than forms police to really drive the future, and it's going to take some leadership to make a change. Because I go around the country, and think about this for a minute. When you have staff accounts in your firm, and you do fundamentally same as last year every year, what generally happens is they don't really learn how to audit. They really know how to fill out the forms repetitively for 5 years in a row. So I basically say, you might not have 5 years of experience anymore, but what you do have is 1 year of experience repeated 5 times. And so what I do when I work with firms, and I did just recently, is I do what I call plain paper. I bring a bunch of seniors into the room, and the first thing they ask is, where's the manual? I said, there's no manual. There's a piece of paper. There's a notepad. And we basically have them write down how they would approach their audit. The two things that happens when they actually have to write it down is they start surfacing from the back of their brain and their mind that they actually do know more than they give themselves credit for. And writing it down actually does help them think it through. Because the one thing that is missing big time from all of these checklists is the ability to think. And I talked about that this morning. Is we need to give our staff the license, the opportunity, and the responsibility to think. One of my attributes that we're going to talk about in a minute is empowerment. Well, empowerment comes with accountability. We want to empower our staff, but we want to have them accountable to move things forward. But we really do need to reshape and rethink the formatting and the framework of what we call leadership in the audit space. So I have 5 attributes that we talk about. Number 1 is quality, without question. We got to do quality, but when I think of the leadership quality, the leadership attribute of quality, I don't think of it as quality at the end of the line. In other words, the buck stop here. Well, that person's the report reviewer, the QC person, so as long as I don't have to get it right, because they're going to catch it. And it happens all the time. But what we need to do is have quality with knowledge. And it is kind of amazing as you kind of go around the country and talk to firms and staffs and go to meet conferences and things of this nature. It's amazing how much or how little time we take to actually read the standards. Because we know the checklist must have considered it because the forms provider provided it, so I don't have to worry about this standard because somewhere there's got to be 35,000 questions on this new standard somewhere in that set of forms. Now, I would hope that if you were to use a medical practitioner or a dentist, that they kind of kept current with the rules. Why should we not be held to a similar standard of keeping current? Why should we not be held to a standard of actually really do understanding? So quality, in my view, is to create the leadership of the ANA needs to drive the importance of quality into the fabric and the culture of the firm by understanding the standards. By making sure that the conversation with their staff is not, here's the rule and here's where it is on the form. Let's talk about the impact of this rule. Let's talk about risk assessment standards or whatever. But the long and the short of it is let's have a conversation about it so we know really what the intent of the rule was, the standard was, and how we as a firm are going to embrace it. Now I know I talk to firms all across the country over the years, and they say, great idea, Al. We'll get to it just as soon as we have time. And of course, most firms don't have time. But if you don't have time, then I refer to the dinosaur slide that Dr. Graham had. Because if we don't take the time to really drive these changes and drive these attributes and take the leadership to move it, we'll become just a dinosaur. A good friend of mine who was the head of ANA at a firm in Minnesota constantly starts with a conversation when we're brainstorming audit approaches. Al, I know I'm a dinosaur. He always starts with that comment. And I said, Dave, you are not a dinosaur. You might think, but you actually, the questions you ask and the things that you're doing in your firm are far from being a dinosaur. And we don't want our audits to be a dinosaur. So when I think of quality, it's not reviewing it at the end, inspecting it at the end. It's building a quality culture in your firm so people understand what they're doing. One firm that I worked with about 4 years ago came into the room, and it was a managing partner, and I said, what's your goal from this operational project I'm doing for you? He said, Al, I just want the silver bullet. And I basically closed my laptop and said, I'm out of here. There's no such thing as a silver bullet. You really, to have quality, you've got to understand your client. You have got to understand your industry and what you're dealing with. You need to understand the standards. And you really need to understand how to do the audit. If you can't, and if your staff cannot do a plain paper audit, start doing audit from scratch, you need to build that into your culture. Start with a lunch and learn and sit down and say, okay, here's a blank notepad. Write an audit program for inventory. Write an audit program for investments. Start getting them to think about what it is they're doing. So at the closing conference, at that session with that firm that wanted the silver bullet, I said, oh, okay, that's fine. I started out the conversation to the rest of the partners and managers. I said, Rich asked me to provide you the silver bullet in this audit approach. I said, you know, I found the silver bullet. So I went into my briefcase, it was a big one, and pulled out a 12-pack of Coors Light and handed every one of them a beer. Because frankly, that was the only silver bullet that could come from this whole process. Quality is an important attribute, but the way we do quality in most firms is we do it at the end. We need to build it into the culture, into the fabric of all of our firms. That's really what we need to do. Relevance. You've got to have leadership to actually believe that the audit's relevant. and communicate and create actions that support its relevance. So just for a moment, have you ever gone to your website and see what your website says about how good your audit is, how relevant your audit is, how much value you bring to your audit, and that you're different than all the rest? Have you read what you told your clients in proposals about your audit? Do you really believe that? Now, my guess is you all hope that maybe by some stroke of luck, we'll actually be able to deliver on all those things that we said on our website. Because we certainly don't have a plan. Because Lord knows, when we bring on a new client, we treat them just like all the rest. Got to fill out the same set of checklists and get that report to them delivered as quickly as possible. And the relevance is something that we're driving, which also correlates to the commoditization. We talk about prices all the time, and this is not a session on pricing, but I just had a call last week that almost knocked me off my chair. Some of you in this room may have heard of a woman by the name of Gail Crosley. She's a consultant to CPA firms in the marketing space, niche marketing. And she called me up and said, Al, I got to ask you about what's going on in audit. And I go, well, what do you mean, Gail? And she says, I'm helping firms, as you know, and I help firms with niche marketing. I help them sometimes put together proposals. And on occasion, our fee is higher, but we demonstrate that we actually do deliver a value proposition, that our audits are more relevant than most. And on a recent proposal situation that we're in, it was an interesting dynamic. And I go, what do you mean? She says, well, we proposed around $90,000 for this audit. She didn't give me any facts other than these numbers. And the highest fee in the proposal was $135, I believe. And I said, oh, well, so then you're lower. Did you leave some money on the table? She goes, well, no. The lowest fee was $35,000. Really? Think about this. How can that be possible? I'm not going to get into this detail, but when you're a client out there and you see a range from $35,000 to $135,000, you're going, these guys are nuts. So needless to say, they took the $35,000 fee because guess what? Every one of those proposals that we deliver that says we're different, your clients don't believe you for 1 second. They don't believe you. Because every proposal they've gotten from the dawn of time was that your CPA firm is different, and I'm changing firms because of fee, because frankly, I'm not getting any value. I am not making the audit relevant. I am not moving things forward. So how would we not why would we put somebody in a leadership concept and driving the audit practice if the leader didn't believe the audit was relevant? And that we were delivering value, and more importantly, helping to communicate and demonstrate and drive the importance of making this audit relevant. I just ask you, when you have your planning meetings with your clients, to print out a page or two of what you say in your website and say, this is what we say about their audit. How are we going to deliver on what we've said on our website? Because we all say it, and I guarantee you, the commoditization of the audit diminishes dramatically if we actually do start delivering value and your clients believe us. But you're not going to make them a believer by words. You're going to make them a believer by actions and demonstrating it. And so when that staff person told me I didn't have to do that section, so I didn't need to know how they make money, that is not the answer you want your staff to know. If you're going to say the audit is relevant, if we're going to build a culture of the relevance of what we do, we absolutely need to drive a culture of relevance in our process so our staff understand it. Understand it's important to take the time to understand their business. Most people think of planning an audit as a forms filling out exercise. Planning an audit is certainly much deeper than that. And when you're planning the audit, you can start talking about how relevant the audit can be and how we can drive difference, how we can drive value. And those clients, when you think about some of your best clients, there's probably a direct correlation to the value you bring them when you're doing the audit and rendering services for them. Because if they don't see value, the audit is only being done to meet a regulatory or banking requirement. And so we have driven the commoditization. You know, everybody complains about the commoditization of the audit. Every CPA firm I talk to. And then the first thing I ask is, well, what do you do when you're under a little fee pressure from your client? Oh, lower my fee. So why are you lowering your fee? Because quite often, whether you're thinking about it or not, you probably haven't delivered anything more than 24 pages with an audit report on it. We do need to make sure that we drive forward and make sure that the audit is absolutely as relevant as possible. But need to build it into the fabric and the culture, because firms are very good at talking the talk. And what really happens, and we talk about what Dr. Graham talked about change, is to start driving change. I always used to say it gets worse before it gets better, but that's what his charts were showing. It gets worse before it gets better, but trust me, it will get better. If you're willing to write off time and give up time, then why don't you spend some time getting your staff to better understand your client? If you're going to make it relevant, make sure you assign your staff to get out of the conference room in which they're operating. Make sure that you say the standard operating procedure in our firm is we don't send our client an email when I'm in their conference room. We actually go talk to them. And oh, by the way, we're going to talk to somebody other than the bookkeeper. How can you really audit inventory if you're not seeing what's happening out in production? Why aren't you talking to the production manager? Why aren't you not having those conversations? We focus on one thing and one thing only: time. I got to get it done because I got another one down the road. And then what we reward and, quote, penalize is time. It's the only metric that we use. And bottom line is, that metric alone is clearly helping undermine the relevance of the audit process. And I think that if we basically look to make things more relevant and drive through our leadership, that we stretch the envelope, that we push things to really get people to think differently about what we're doing, the future, without question, is much brighter. Innovation. We got to be willing to try things different. Because we got to have first of all, we got to build in this innovation mindset and the whole structure, the core of this thing, what I call first time right. But innovation is a balance, if you will, between an organization when you think of profitability, client service, and quality. We got to have good balance in that thing because we want to issue an appropriate opinion. We definitely want to be innovative in client service. We definitely, a results measure is profitability. But the core drivers of that balance is our people, our process, and our systems. And when I think about innovation, we need to be innovative in our use of technology. It's a granted, most firms are using technology, but we're not using it very innovatively, because when most people rolled out new technology, they got the new package from CCH or whomever they're using, installed it on their system, and what do we teach them how to do? Fill out the forms. We taught them how to put together the package so it could be reviewed. And then what does the general head of A&A usually do in most firms? They usually put policies and procedures in to make it easier for them to review the file, as opposed to make it more usable to understand their client, to do the right amount of work. So start first with innovation is, what do our people need? And it may not be technology, it may be a better understanding of the industry in which they operate. One firm called me up and says, I want to send this senior to some training. I want to teach him to be a better auditor. What A&A classes would you recommend? I said, I don't have any to recommend. But if this auditor works in one industry, send him to all training he can possibly go to learn about the industry. Because how can you not understand the industry while doing an audit? You really should. So it's a matter of being innovative in your thought process. It's a matter of being really thoughtful in what your people need in this process. And that will certainly drive the culture. With innovation, you need to also think about your process, how you do your work. Most firms' workflow is abysmal. Our whole process audit process is what I call the FIFO approach to auditing. The first in, first out. Obviously, I can't start planning this audit because I got this other one to finish. And then, oh by gosh, I ran out of time and now it's the first day of field work and I got to fill out all these planning forms. And so what we do is keep pushing work back. And so then we do the planning during field work, and then we actually do the difficult areas after field work. And then we issue the report, run out of time, so it's no wonder we can't deliver any relevance in this audit process because we've pushed all the work back. So your leader in A&A space, and I'm not saying one person, your A&A leadership, the drivers of change, need to think about finding ways to move the work forward, pull it forward, so we can do the right amount of planning. And planning is certainly, without question, a lot more than just filling out forms. Think about other better ways to utilize your systems. It's amazing. Data extraction software and tools have been out there forever, and every firm has it. And every firm says, yep, we're going to use it this year. Another year goes by, we're going to use it this year. We were just kidding last year. And long or short of it is, we spend so much time doing what we did for the past 25 years that we forget that we can better leverage technology and better use tools if we think things through. The same as last year approach has to be put by the wayside. If you want to change your process, number one thing that you might want to think about, don't let your staff look at last year's work papers. Why do they need to look? If they know what they're doing, and if you're a good supervisor, there really should be no need or minimal need. But we constantly say, just look at last year's work papers, because what is the answer for most staff people is, why did you do this schedule? Well, the answer is, of course, we did it last year that way. But it's really being innovative in your thought process. You need to think about the future. You need to think about going forward. You need to think about these types of items from the standpoint, because that really clearly makes a huge difference in what we're trying to accomplish. Innovation is a key attribute of driving A&A leadership to drive this change, to move us on a positive side of the crossroads. Business-mindedness. It's an important attribute of this process. I kind of look at this and I get firms all across the country asking me, what's the perfect fee realization, Al? And I go, there is no such thing as perfect fee realization. Well, what's the market fee realization? And I go, fee realization is a miserable measure. And they go, that doesn't make sense. Everybody measures fee realization. And I go, great. I said, well, I was working with a firm, and their fee realization is 10%. And they're going to say, well, they must stink. I go, no, their billing rates are $5,000 an hour. And I got another firm that their fee realization is 200%. They go, that's the firm I want to copy. I said, great, their billing rates are $20 an hour. We got to think about leadership has to have some business-mindedness in this process. We need to think it through from a business perspective because, sometimes and many times the answers are not black and white. Now, I'm not telling you to always do what the client wants, But we got to put some business in this practice. And the number one business-mindedness thing for me is don't take on work that you don't understand. So many firms say, give me a balance sheet, I can audit the bejeebers out of it and do a right job. Most firms that get sued are because they made a bad business decision because they thought they knew that they could take on this unique industry and get it right. That is very, very, very important, is that we got some business acumen built into the leadership of the A&A practice. Last but certainly not least, empowerment. We want empowerment and accountability of our staff. We want our staff have so many great ideas if just given the opportunity to try them. Ask them what you would do differently. What can we do differently? Because frankly, most people that stay in public accounting is kind of scary to me because they fundamentally think I'm filling out forms and kind of enjoy it. I tell most staff people, if I had to fill out all the forms you guys fill out, I wouldn't be in public accounting today. Because bottom line is I didn't get into this to fill out forms. I got into this to understand my client and my industry, which then causes me to try things. And I was lucky in the entirety of my career. Maybe it's just because I just did it, but I always felt empowered to try things differently. That I wanted to change, and I can't stand the status quo. And sometimes you have to pull me back, and sometimes I change just for the reason to change. But the long and the short of it is, we got to build an empowerment culture in your staff to try things different and say it's okay to make a mistake. It's just all it is more time, we fix it. Now we're not going, but bottom line is culturally, there is so much potential in our profession. And there's so much intellect in all of our people, the power of all of us working together, without question can make an absolute positive, huge difference on the future of the audit and where we're trying to move this process. But we need to empower them and not shackle them to a 96-page disclosure checklist. And don't get back to me until you get all 96 pages completed. And oh, by the way, what's on page 84? What's on page 36? Bottom line is, if your staff think of it as nothing more than a checklist, they are not going to really understand what it is they're auditing, and that's why they're not going to really know what the bottom line was on their last audit. They're not even going to know how the client makes money or what their organization mission, vision, and values are. Empower them to talk to people. Actually encourage them. You might have to nudge them. Conversation isn't necessarily their number one choice, so we need to kind of empower them to talk. We need to empower them to move forward. But if we focus on driving a leadership change in our A&A space from a culture perspective, on quality and the front end, that the audit is relevant, that we are going to different, and we are going to live up to our website promises or proposal promises. It will make a huge difference. We're certainly going to be innovative. We're going to have business mindedness, and we're going to build a culture of our team being empowered to try things differently. Then, I believe the future of our audit is certainly going to be powerful. You can't ignore technology. You have to embrace it. So when I think about this in conclusion, I was a Boy Scout. And when I was a Boy Scout, the number one rule of Boy Scout is when you go to a campsite is what? To leave it better than it was when you entered it. So I ask you, if you think about handing off this profession to all these young people in this room, are we leaving the audit profession in better shape than it was when we inherited it? Are we really? We've now got a commoditization. We're not providing value, but I honestly believe it's not too late. I'm an optimist. I've never been a pessimist. And I actually think, for all of you young people in the room, auditing is fun. Now, some of you in this room will say, Al's nuts. Actually, auditing can be fun. It can be at least challenging and rewarding. But you have to have a passion and an intellectual curiosity to really understand your business. And if you have that passion and intellectual curiosity, then when you come up as partners, you're going to say, that group of staff, they get it because we brought them along. I thank you for your time and attention. I encourage you to drive change in your profession, in your audit practice, because we can make a difference. Thank you very much.